Welcome to this webinar on benchmarking your sustainable purchasing program, a pilot study. This webinar is hosted by TCO Development, the organization behind TCO Certified. Before handing over to our guest speaker, we would like to shortly introduce our organization and latest news. At the end of this webinar, there will be time for questions. TCO Certified is the leading global sustainability certification for IT products. TCO Certified has certified over 10,000 product models from over 400 brands to date. We cover 8 product categories, including displays, notebooks, tablets, desktops, headsets, and projectors. With a comprehensive mix of social and environmental criteria, TCO Certified covers the product lifecycle from manufacturing through the user phase and recovery phase. A cornerstone of TCO Certified is our independent verification of compliance. This happens not only at the product level, but also in factories and in brand initiatives as well. Independent accredited organizations verify that factories and products comply with all criteria in TCO Certified. Verification is done both before and after the certification process, covering the entire validity period. The process includes ensuring that corrective actions are implemented in all cases of factory non-conformities. TCO Certified meets the requirement of ISO and has been approved by the Global Eco-Labeling Network. All verification is carried out by specialist organizations in accordance with ISO International Standard for Competence Requirements applied to testing and calibration laboratories. Verification is an important aspect of what we're doing. Getting close to some of the problems is what is so important, not just setting the criteria up front. This webinar is part of a series that we run throughout the year. The next webinar we're hosting is on 25th of October on Ecolabels Used Right, a tool for sustainable procurement. Other resources available include our quick guides accessible on our webpage, like our nearly updated guide on sustainable IT purchasing. Also available on our webpage, you can search for certified products. So whether you're getting started or need more specialized support, our website provides a wide range of services and materials. Our criteria is updated every 3 years, and we are now approaching the launch of the next generation. TCO Certified Generation 8 will be launched during Summit in Brussels on 4th of December. The next generation is our largest step yet towards a sustainable life cycle for IT products. At the summit in Brussels, you will be able to join the live launch, meet experts in the field, and gain a deeper understanding of current sustainability challenges. Please contact us to receive an invitation. So, without further ado, we would like to hand over to Kris Spriano from the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, SLPC, to walk you through their case study on benchmarking sustainable purchasing programs. So welcome, Kris. We're glad to have you with us.
Thanks, Cassandra. It's great to be here. Cassandra, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks again, everybody, for giving me your time this afternoon, this morning. Yes, my name is Kris Spriano. I'm the SPLC BENCHMARK Program Manager. I'm going to be specifically talking today about one of our program offerings called SPLC BENCHMARK. And I'll start by giving everyone a little bit of background on our organization. I'll get into the details of what Benchmark is. And then I'm going to share some of our key findings to date with the Benchmark program. As Cassandra had mentioned in the title of this webinar, we have gone through 2 pilot releases of Benchmark with 2 separate groups of organizations. And we have some high-level key findings that we're going to share from that pilot, at the end of the presentation. So again, I am from the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, or SPLC. And what do we do? Who are we? We're actually not that old of an organization. Around 2012, we had a cross-sector community that recognized that as large institutions, we needed to simplify and standardize sustainable purchasing and really learn from one another, produce guidance, allow best practices to be recognized, measured, and ultimately drive forward a sustainable economy through large institutional purchasing. A lot of organizations are, very specifically focused on maybe one aspect of sustainable purchasing. Our founders, and let me go to that slide, recognized that we could also learn from one another, that the government sector, for example, was doing some great stuff, and so was the private sector. And how do we really take the collective power and knowledge and learnings from all of these different sectors and organizations specific to sustainable purchasing and really move forward faster and in a leadership way? And so SPLC was founded. Today we have over 190 members, again, across different sectors, including government, corporations, private industry, and higher education. And those members are split up between the groups that you see here. So we have the institutional purchasers themselves. We have suppliers that are looking to, to really have those large institutions consider them for their purchases. And then we also very much align to organizations like TCO Development to continue to learn and progress together. And that's a big part of our organization as well, is really being the curator of those best practices and really driving efficiencies and leadership across those sectors, all sectors. So in terms of what SPLC typically offers to its members and even non-members, we have a lot of resources that are publicly posted and available, but from a member service offering, we have founded ourselves, if you will, by really convening a leadership community of sustainable purchasers and bringing people together that wouldn't have normally been, brought together, collectively developing leadership principles in sustainable purchasing. We have produced extensive guidance, including category guidance. So we do serve both the indirect as well as direct purchasing needs. But more specifically, we have individual category guidance. For example, things to consider when you go to do office furniture purchasing or office supplies purchasing, as well as guidance that applies to the direct side. The direct side is where I actually came from. I'm from private industry, Cisco Systems, as a matter of fact. So right up TCO's alley. And so when we take a look at Benchmark, more specifically, Benchmark is really trying to address the top of this pyramid. How do we take a program or a set of activities that an organization is doing around sustainable purchasing, and how do we help enable that organization to do a self-assessment? How well are you doing with the activities that you've prioritized and are working on? And then also benchmarking. Benchmarking was one of the first things that our members asked for back in the early days of SPLC. And this benchmark program is about 1.5 years old now. So it's definitely, the culmination of all these activities that you see below. And ultimately, we recognize leadership in many different ways, including at our summit. But benchmark, by way of being able to measure a program, also helps to drive that leadership recognition, and ultimately, our theory of change is, drive that market of sustainable purchasers, innovation in our supply base, et cetera. So what is Benchmark? Benchmark is really focused on the processes that you're using within your organization to prioritize your impacts and establish strategies around those impacts, and then ultimately make progress. So Benchmark is a process management-based set of programs and tools that are really seeking to drive that leadership that I talked about. Benchmark answers questions like, what does a good sustainable purchasing program even look like? Whether it's indirect purchasing, direct purchasing, whether it's the hospitality industry or state government, how do we commonly define what a program is, what it looks like, and what does good actually look like? How does your organization's sustainable purchasing program measure up to this? And how does it compare to peers, whether in your industry, whether in your sector or outside your sector? Definitely what we're seeing is there are true strengths that are being demonstrated in each of the sectors. And, so we really try to enable that learning between sectors as well as, within sectors. And then what can I learn from all this to really improve my program and capture things like efficiencies that drive cost reductions, building and embedding a sustainability team within purchasing, et cetera. Ultimately, we want Benchmark to be able to walk an organization through this and identify the prioritized areas of opportunity that establish the next set of strategic goals and ultimately allows an organization to establish an action plan for moving forward. So there are different ways to engage with Benchmark, but regardless of which you might consider engaging in, the process is the same. So it starts by identifying your sustainable purchasing program. And this is really taking a look at what are your environmental, social, and economic impact priorities. If you take a look at your spend, what are the most influential pieces of that spend that could potentially influence environmental, social, and economic sustainability? And then what are you doing to address those impacts? So these two things collectively serve as that foundation that ultimately we measure two ways. We measure against SPLC's maturity model, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then we also measure to the peers that have been historically part of the Benchmark program. So what's the maturity model? So the maturity model is a set of questions, 38 as a matter of fact, and these questions are all about best practices within sustainable purchasing. And within those best practices, those 38 best practice questions, there are 4 measured maturity levels. Now, where did these come from? The SPLC Benchmark Working Group is the governing body that has essentially prioritized these 38 best practices. And the Benchmark Working Group also leverages work products from SPLC that are already available. And I mentioned some of those, including our guidance for leadership and sustainable purchasing, our overall principles for leadership. And I absolutely want to note that in addition to that, the working group really seeks to, again, curate. So we're always looking for sustainable purchasing related work that aligns, research and work that aligns to what we're trying to drive. And so we make a very conscious effort to also align to ISO 20400 and DEFRA's flexible framework. This is a busy slide, but this is a picture of the 38 questions and all the different maturity levels. While this is a busy slide, the message here is not very busy. The message is that when you think about benchmarking, you can benchmark to what's being done today in the world, and then you can benchmark to a larger vision. And I definitely want to emphasize that the maturity model is really a high bar. It is really establishing the leading criteria and maturity for these 38 best practices as what we really need to achieve in institutional purchasing to meet and to make that vision, to create that vision of a truly sustainable global economy. So here are the ways to engage in Benchmark. For those of you that are in purchasing organizations and you just want to get a feel for how your organization is doing against the criteria that we assess with, I would absolutely highly recommend the quick assessment worksheet, which is a downloadable worksheet. It's free, it's online, available to members and non-members, and it will take you through a very high-level assessment of what your organization is doing around sustainable purchasing, and kind of walks you through highlighting some of your strengths and really highlighting some areas of opportunity. Now, if you have that and you're like, yep, I'm good, I want to keep going on this and I want to dig in a little bit more, then you can take a look at the maturity model. It is also available for a free download. However, it is self-guided when you take it down and you approach it that way. If your organization wanted some help in walking through it and actually getting third-party validation attached to it, then we offer basically a coaching / consultative opportunity called the guided individual assessment. And that's where I come in and I work with your team to guide you through the assessment and ultimately produce an executive summary that really very thoroughly takes a look at what key areas to prioritize and next steps. And then along with the guided individual assessment, we've also launched what we are calling the Bimonthly Cohort Forum. And this is an interactive webinar, is probably the best way to describe it, where we invite all of the organizations that have gone through the full assessment to come in and listen to organizations that have demonstrated leadership in certain areas, certain best practices. So our idea is, we don't want all the organizations to have to go through the learning curve to understand, how to do product disclosures with your suppliers, how to get that going. So if we recognize that an organization is leading in that area, and if the organization is willing, we'll bring them in, similar to what we're doing today, we'll bring them in, but it's more of an interactive webinar where we're actually doing a how-to and talking about challenges that other organizations may be having, and working through those challenges almost as a miniature working group, so to speak. So that bi-monthly cohort forum is an optional event that's really part of going through the guided individual assessment. So why would an organization participate in Benchmark? There are many different reasons that a hospital or a government agency or a private company might decide to go through this. As I mentioned earlier, being able to compare your organization to other similar organizations was one of the early requests of our cross-sector membership community. But as we're going through more of these assessments, I'm also finding that the reasons that people participate or organizations participate are generally different depending on how mature their program is. So for some of the earlier organizations just kind of starting to formalize what they're doing around sustainable procurement or purchasing, they leverage the assessment process largely to formalize their program, to build a team of champions and really start to approach the work towards improving their program more strategically. Whereas some of the organizations that have been recognizing approaching sustainable purchasing from a more strategic lens is important. Maybe they've put some policy in place Maybe they have some formal programs around supplier diversity or supplier engagement, maybe greenhouse gas emissions. Those more mature programs are generally looking to really prioritize their next steps in order to oftentimes improve operational efficiencies. How can we do an inventory of what we're doing in this very big organization and start to learn how to do it, faster, better, how to learn to do it in a way that really captures, these opportunities to reduce costs, let's say, to develop suppliers, and or reduce risk. So again, there are different motivations, as we've seen, as far as why people are engaging in benchmark, but this is just a summary of what we've seen to date. So these are the organizations that have gone through the full assessment, the full maturity model to date, here in black. We have had 14 US-based government organizations. We've had 6 states within the US, and we've had 8 state of California government agencies participate. We are now in the process of going through or taking our first private organization through the assessment. That is Sunoco Products, and they are joined by 4 additional government agencies that are, continuing through and are about in the middle of the process. And I should say that these black text organizations were all part of those 2 pilots that I mentioned earlier. So those are the ones that we're actually going to focus on with our key findings to date. So the slide doesn't do a good job of summarizing the makeup of the 2 pilots, but the first pilot was specifically focused around states in the US, here in the US, and their sustainable purchasing programs. And the second one was a deep dive into the state of California's agencies. So it's no coincidence that you see state of California mentioned many times. They actually participated twice in the pilots, once as representing their state, and then again inviting their individual agencies to evaluate the programs within those agencies. So what I'm going to share is a high-level summary of the findings from taking them through the full assessment, the benchmark maturity model. So, the first key takeaway is really just, being able to say, yes, we can measure sustainable purchasing programs, coming out of private industry and specifically myself focused on greenhouse gas emissions reduction within the IT industry. I found myself oftentimes asking the question of, where am I at? What does good look like, right? Like those earlier questions. And it sounds elementary, but up until now, there really was no way to say, here's where you are. And so just by going through the pilots, we've now essentially proven that it is possible to measure, to pinpoint how mature an organization is across the maturity model, across the multiple dimensions of demonstrating sustainable purchasing leadership. And that's really incredible. And it really leads into the next key takeaway, which is not only can we measure, but we have a mechanism, we have a methodology to specifically call out what that organization needs to do in order to mature their sustainable purchasing program. So that's the second key takeaway, is that we have essentially revealed the path that each of these organizations can follow to really drive to a higher level of leadership in those 38 best practice areas. Now, how did they do, right? That's probably what you guys are wondering. So this slide doesn't show a US flag. This kind of looks like a US flag, but it's not. This is a chart of the 2 pilots and the results of those pilots. And the dark line is the state level pilot. So it's a median maturity demonstrated by the states across 5 different categories of leadership. And this is essentially how we organize the 38 best practices in the pilots. And they're organized basically under our principles of leadership in sustainable purchasing. If you'd like to learn more about, what these are, you can ask me at the end of this webinar, or you can also go to our website to better understand, what these represent. But basically, you can see that at a state level and then at a California agency level, we have a ways to go, and that's the first thing that you see when you really look at a high level how our organizations did. However, the encouraging part, the really great part, is they know what they need to do, right? They've identified areas where they're strong. They've identified areas where they have opportunities that, ultimately are going to lead to a business case as well. So that's really exciting to be able to have that visibility for the first time. The third key takeaway is really around identifying trends in the organizations that participated and understanding that there are, definitely 2 different distinct populations of organizations. When we took the 14 organizations through the pilot, and even now, as we continue to do this with other organizations, we're seeing these 2 categories of emerging leaders and program initiators. And our emerging leaders are basically states and departments that have some areas where they're doing really well. They are very, very capable of serving as an example to others. And they understand the effectiveness, the efficiency, the business benefits of approaching sustainable purchasing strategically through a program view. So they don't need as much help really standing that business case up. What they really need help with is broadening what's included in their programs. Maybe they're really strong on greenhouse gas emissions, but supplier engagement, supplier development, they really, they need some help. And maybe the private industry is a great way to help them, where private industry is doing a lot of great work on the supplier engagement side. So we see this group of emerging leaders within this sector in particular, and then we also see this group of program initiators. These organizations have very few formal program elements in place. They're always doing something already associated to sustainable purchasing, but they're not really connecting all those efforts from an environmental, social, and economic standpoint. They're all kind of separate efforts that were brought forward strategically into the organization as their own thing, maybe a regulatory requirement, but they're not really capitalizing on economies of scale across the organization, embedding their practices across procurement comprehensively. So these are program initiators, and they really need help with the business cases. They need help really taking those ad hoc activities, rolling them into a proposed formal program, and again, still learning from not just our leaders within Benchmark, but our leaders outside of Benchmark as well in the world. And then the last key takeaway that I wanted to share that I thought you guys would all think would be interesting is just how we're able to slice and dice the best practices into different categories. So earlier I shared this slide here that summarized the results of maturity. across our principles of leadership. We can slice and dice the data a little bit differently and organize it by the extent to which the program is embedded inside of the organization. And when we do that, we're looking across 4 different categories of embedding, and that includes, a lot of things that you guys would be familiar with, like supplier engagement. To what extent do you, bring your suppliers in to establish your sustainable purchasing goals? To what extent do you bring your suppliers in to, to really produce solutions for some of your bigger challenges, whether you're on the indirect side or the direct side of purchasing, as well as organizational processes and policies. Things like, are you measuring your employees in their performance reviews against sustainable purchasing goals? Stakeholder engagement is more focused around third-party engagement. So, do you work with TCO development if you're, trying to establish product roadmaps? How are you bringing in external stakeholders into your area of work? And then staff engagement. Staff engagement, again, would be, more broadly engaging procurement teams, broad strategies that, that cover all of your impact priorities, employees that are relevant, let's say. So when we slice and dice the different categories or ways that our 38 best practices can be embedded into an organization, we find that the supplier engagement area is by far the most consistently underutilized best practice across, again, remember, this is the government sector that we piloted, and really serves as a tremendous opportunity to really get this sector, to the next level of maturity. So just interesting, to be able to really narrow things down more pointedly for a particular sector and, for a specific area of our maturity model. So I think that, yes, that ends my part of the presentation. There is a lot, as I mentioned, on our website about the maturity model, the benchmark program, and I definitely welcome everybody to download the quick assessment worksheet, like I said, just to get a feel for the types of questions being asked, maybe use it for your own organization. And I'm also happy to get any direct outreach from you guys. If you want to email me with questions or ask me right now, that's great. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kris. So we have a tool. There is a box where you will be able to ask questions for Kris, or if you have any questions for us here at TCO Certified. So please, we have some time for questions. I could start with one for you, Kris. Do you feel there were any particular aspects of the benchmarking exercise that were more challenging for the participants than others?
That's a great question. Yes. And we've actually significantly changed how we take people through the maturity model as a result of it. I think particularly, even for the emerging leaders, I think defining what's included in their sustainable purchasing program was a big challenge. And part of it, has to do with the different ways that organizations really, I guess, assign this work. So, if you think of a state government, for example, we had my state that I'm in, Massachusetts, has an environmental director that is managing their environmentally preferred purchasing. And she was hired to do that job, but being able to, represent the wider view of the state of Massachusetts program is something that, not one person has in the organization. They don't have a, chief sustainable purchasing officer. So I think, having people come in with, specific expertise in one area, and then, then really asking them to think about, how wide do you want to go? To what extent would you say you're actually focused on sustainable purchasing? I think there are, lots of different ways to define that, and even span of control might influence what you put in your program. So we've definitely recognized, that very first foundational step of defining what's in your program to be challenging for all of our organizations, and that actually was surprising to us, because I think, again, coming out of private industry, we had a pretty well defined formality around our program, but I think as SPLC we recognize that there are lots of organizations where that's simply not the case, and having that larger vision as to what might be included in your program is also teaching organizations that you have a lot more partners, you have a lot more champions in your organization that you can lean on and bring in, so that you're not just one person focused on one area of it. You really belong to a larger effort. That makes sense.
Yes, thank you. So I have another question here. Were there more of a focus on environmental or social aspects when using the benchmarking tool?
Really good questions. So hands down, people were much quicker to offer their environmental aspects of their program. So the default, like coming to the table to define your program, was almost always environmental activities first. However, what we did see when we started to, ask more questions and really, kind of peel things back, open the hood on the car, right? Is that there were plenty of social and economic activities going on as well, but these organizations didn't necessarily put them all together under the sustainable purchasing umbrella. And supplier diversity is in there. Things like ethical contracts, supplier ethics, and policies and regulatory requirements that that ask suppliers, vendors, contractors to sign a code of ethics contract before they entered into a business agreement. Those were things that I don't think had historically been on the radar of the folks that were assigned to sustainable purchasing, which, I think they always knew, it's complementary, but to put it into their program as, as an activity was just a different way of looking, again, more strategically and more holistically at what they were doing.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. So another question here also, what are your expectations regarding the private participants? I saw your slide there, you were going through that the majority taking part of this project now in the first setting were public, and now you had one private one. Are you expecting a different result?
That's a very good question. So I'm not expecting very different results at this point, but I could be proven wrong. My suspicion is that when we bring in direct purchasing, we're going to see, I guess the answer is I'm not suspecting that we'll get significantly different results, but I do suspect that we'll see the supplier engagement maturity scores go up when we bring in direct purchasing, because just logically we were focused primarily on indirect purchasing with our pilots, and with Sunoco coming in, we're now looking at Sunoco's direct and indirect purchasing, and naturally when you talk about direct purchasing, you're talking about manufacturing things, right, and your products, and that is just by nature of what it is, you have to get closer to at least your first tier suppliers. So I suspect that we'll see a slight increase in that aspect of it, in that area, in terms of maturity. But overall, I don't expect a significant difference. But it will be very, very interesting to see. We're going to finish Sunoco up probably around the January timeframe, and this is an ongoing thing. So we would really, really love more private industries to try it out. It's very confidential. Nothing is shared unless you want it to be shared. In Sunoco's case, they're very proud of being our first private industry to go through the process. So they want to really demonstrate that leadership that they're taking, and they should be very proud of that. But we would really, really love to take additional private industries through it, so that we can get as good of a representative sample as we have right now from government.
It will be interesting to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a final question here. What is the major difference between the ISO 2400 standard and the benchmark?
Yeah, we don't. I've personally been the one that really has gone through it, if you will, as well as my predecessor Jason Pearson, our former president and CEO of SPLC. And largely, we do not see significant differences in the individual content of each of the aspects. I think the areas that were different is just how we organize things, and so we don't want to be different. We really want to represent a curated measurement system that really accounts for what our members have learned, what they've been prioritizing, what other organizations like ISO have prioritized. So largely, I would say they're very aligned. Probably how we're different is just our approach in taking this more formal definition of a program, and using that to do that measurement. Yeah, and then same with the flexible framework. I think against the flexible framework, we probably go a little bit wider, specifically around the supplier engagement side, not too surprising. But outside of that, again, quite aligned.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, thank you, Kris, for participating, and thank you to all of those who have to this webinar. Please follow our series of webinars coming up as well. The next one on 25th of October on eco-labels. And you have our contact information. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can visit our website, and please email us for further questions. Thank you.